What if the dish you ordered on your honeymoon in Paris, the one that made you close your eyes and whisper something romantic about the old world, was actually invented in a kitchen in Buffalo, New York, by people who had never crossed an ocean in their lives? What if the bread you slice for your morning toast, the sauce you ladle over chicken at your fanciest dinner parties, and the dessert you order with a small, embarrassed smile because the menu calls it French, were all built on American soil by Americans who simply liked the way the word French looked on a sign? France is one of the greatest culinary civilizations in human history. Nobody is arguing that. But some of its most famous exports never came from France at all. And once you know which ones, you cannot unknow it. Hi, my name is David, and this is Food Origins, the show where we pull back the curtain on the foods you grew up loving and find out the story you were told was almost entirely wrong. Hit subscribe, because this one is going to genuinely rearrange the furniture in your brain. Fair warning. If you have ever ordered something at a restaurant just because it had the word French in front of it, you may want to sit down for the next 30 minutes. We are going to be here a while. Food number 1, French toast. Let's start with the obvious one because it sets the rules for everything else on this list. French toast, that golden, custard-soaked, butter-fried slab of breakfast genius dusted with powdered sugar and drowned in syrup, is one of the most universally beloved breakfast foods on the planet. The name has the word French sitting right there at the front of it, doing all the heavy lifting. You see it on a menu, and you assume Paris. You assume cobblestone streets and a small cafe with iron chairs and a waiter who looks vaguely irritated by your existence. You assume centuries of refinement. You assume wrong. The dish itself, the practice of soaking stale bread in eggs and milk and frying it, is genuinely ancient. The Romans were doing it. There is a recipe in a 4th century Roman cookbook called Apicius that describes essentially the same technique. Medieval Europe did it. Every culture with bread and eggs eventually figured out that combining them was a good idea. The French call their version pain perdu, which translates to lost bread, because the whole point was to rescue stale loaves that would otherwise be wasted. So the dish is not American. Let me be clear about that. But the name French toast, the specific phrase that millions of people use every single morning, that name was almost certainly coined in America. The most widely cited origin points to a tavern keeper named Joseph French in Albany, New York in 1724. The story goes that he served the dish on his menu, but did not know how to use an apostrophe correctly. He meant to write French's toast, but he wrote French toast instead, and the name stuck because nobody in colonial New York apparently had the heart to correct him. That story may be partially apocryphal, but the documentary trail of the phrase French toast in print runs through American newspapers and cookbooks in the 18th and 19th centuries far more densely than it runs through anywhere in France. In France today, if you walk into a cafe and ask for French toast, the waiter will give you the same look an American gets when they ask for English muffins in London. Polite confusion followed by quiet pity. The French dish exists, but it is not called what we call it. The name is ours. A tavern keeper in colonial New York who could not punctuate properly accidentally branded a global breakfast staple. That is the most American origin story I can possibly imagine, and I love it. Food number 2, French fries. I knew this one was going to be controversial before I even started writing this episode, and I have already received approximately 17 imaginary angry letters from Belgium in my head. So let me say this up front. Belgium has a genuine, beautiful, ancient claim to the deep-fried potato. Belgian frites are a national treasure. The Belgians have been making them in twice-fried perfection for centuries, and they deserve every bit of credit for that tradition. I am not coming for Belgium. I would never. But here's the part that surprises people. The phrase French fries, the specific name that the entire English-speaking world uses, was almost certainly coined by American soldiers stationed in Belgium during the First World War. Those soldiers were served fried potatoes by Belgians who happened to speak French, because French is one of the official languages of Belgium. The Americans, who were not exactly experts in European geography or linguistics, assumed they were in France. They assumed the food was French. They went home and told everyone they knew about these incredible French fries they had eaten overseas. The name spread, and by the 1930s, French fries had become a fixture of American diner culture, served with hamburgers, ketchup, and an unshakable confidence that they had come from Paris. They had not come from Paris. They had come from a Belgian street vendor who was rolling his eyes the entire time. But the American adoption of the name, the American mass production of the format, and the American export of the cultural concept of French fries to the rest of the planet through the rise of fast food, that is all American. McDonald's alone serves more than 9 million pounds of French fries every single day worldwide. That is not a footnote. That is the entire global identity of the dish, built on a misunderstanding by hungry American soldiers and then handed back to the world wearing a name France never asked for. Food number 3. French dressing. This one stops people cold every single time I bring it up at dinner parties. And dinner parties are the only social environment in which I am allowed to discuss food history at length without people quietly leaving the room. French dressing, that bright orange, slightly sweet, vaguely tomato-tinged bottled salad dressing that has sat in the salad aisle of every American grocery store for the better part of a century, is not French. It has never been French. France does not know it exists. France would be deeply offended if you described it to a French chef. In France, a salad dressing is one thing and one thing only: olive oil, a splash of red wine vinegar, a little Dijon if you are feeling adventurous, salt, pepper. That is vinaigrette. That is the entire dressing tradition. Done. The American product, called French dressing, was invented in the United States in the early 20th century and standardized into the bright orange version most people recognize by mid-century. The orange color comes from paprika and tomato, ingredients no French vinaigrette would ever include. The sweetness comes from sugar and corn syrup, which would cause a Parisian chef to suffer a small medical event on the spot. The name French was attached to it for the same reason American Italian dressing exists. Because in the marketing language of mid-century American grocery stores, French and Italian were shorthand for European, and European was shorthand for sophisticated. Slap a country on it, and customers will pay more for it. That was the playbook, and it worked. Today, French dressing is regulated by the United States Food and Drug Administration under its own specific standard of identity, which requires a minimum oil content and certain color parameters. France has no equivalent regulation because France has no equivalent product. The bottle that sits in your refrigerator door right now, wearing the word French, is purely, entirely, magnificently American. I will not say it is good. I will not say it is bad. I will simply say it is ours. Food number 4, French onion soup. Now this one is going to require some care, because French onion soup actually does have French roots. Onion soup has been a peasant staple in France for centuries, born from the same logic as every great peasant dish in food history. You have onions, you have stock, you have stale bread, you have time. You combine them. You eat. You survive the winter. That tradition is real, and it belongs to France completely. But the version of French onion soup that Americans order at restaurants today, the deeply caramelized, beef broth-soaked masterpiece with a thick raft of toasted bread and a molten cap of bubbling Gruyere cheese broiled to a golden, slightly blackened crust. That specific version was popularized and elevated in American restaurants in the mid-20th century. The American version is richer, beefier, and significantly more cheese-forward than most traditional French preparations. The French original tends to use a lighter broth and a more restrained hand with the cheese, because France is a country that has never in its history believed that more cheese is automatically better. America, on the other hand, has built its entire culinary identity around the principle that more cheese is always better, and sometimes additional cheese on top of that, and possibly some bacon for safety. American chefs in the 1950s and 1960s, particularly those associated with the rise of continental cuisine in upscale New York and Chicago restaurants, transformed the modest French onion soup into the heavy, cheese-crowned spectacle that defines the dish today. Julia Child played a role in popularizing the home version. Continental restaurants put it on every menu, and by the 1970s, the American version had become so dominant in the global imagination that even some French restaurants began adapting their own preparations to meet American expectations. The peasant soup is French. The cheese-crowned croque you ordered last week is American. The difference matters more than you might think. Food number 5, the croissant. Stay with me here, because this one has layers, both literally and historically, and the truth is more interesting than the legend. The croissant is the most famous French pastry in the world, the very symbol of Parisian breakfast. The thing that every American who has ever flown to France has photographed and posted with a caption like, "Finally living my best life." France has so thoroughly claimed the croissant that the idea of it coming from anywhere else feels almost absurd. It did not come from France. It came from Austria. The croissant descends directly from an Austrian pastry called the Kipferl, which has existed in Vienna and across Central Europe since at least the 13th century. The Kipferl is a crescent-shaped pastry, often made with a dense, slightly sweet dough and filled with nuts or sugar. Its shape is the same, its lineage is documented, and the most famous origin legend attached to the croissant claims that Viennese bakers created a celebratory crescent shape to commemorate the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the Siege of Vienna in 1683, with the crescent shape being a sly reference to the Ottoman flag. Whether that legend is fully true or partially mythologized, the Austrian roots of the pastry are not in dispute. The croissant arrived in France in the early 19th century, brought there by an Austrian entrepreneur named August Zang, who opened a Viennese bakery in Paris in 1839. His bakery became wildly popular. French bakers studied his pastries, copied them, and over the following decades adapted the dense Austrian Kipferl into the lighter, flakier, butter-laminated French version we know today. So France did refine the pastry. France did transform it. France perfected the technique of laminated dough that gives the modern croissant its hundreds of paper-thin layers. But the croissant itself was Austrian first. And here is where America enters the story. The mass production and global export of the croissant as a daily commercial breakfast item, the version sold at every coffee shop chain from Seattle to Singapore, the frozen croissant industry, the croissant sandwich, the bizarre but commercially triumphant croissant donut hybrid known as the cronut, invented at a New York bakery in 2013. All of that scale, all of that global commercial reach, was built and exported by American food culture. The pastry started in Vienna. France made it beautiful. America made it inescapable. Food number 6, French vanilla. I need a moment for this one, because every time I think about it, I genuinely smile. French vanilla, the flavor that appears in ice creams, coffee creamers, candles, lip balms, and roughly 40% of all baked goods sold in American grocery stores, is not French. It is not even a flavor in the way most people think it is. There is no special French method of growing vanilla beans. There is no Parisian vanilla orchard. France produces almost no vanilla and has no historical vanilla cultivation tradition of any significance. So where does the term French vanilla actually come from? It comes from a specific American style of custard-based ice cream that uses egg yolks in the base. The French half of the name refers not to France the country, but to a French method of preparing ice cream custards called French custard ice cream, which uses egg yolks to create a richer, yellower, more luxurious base than the simpler American-style ice cream made without eggs. That technique, the egg yolk-enriched custard base, is genuinely French in origin. It comes from the broader French tradition of crème anglaise and custard sauces that has been part of French pastry for centuries. So when American ice cream manufacturers in the mid-20th century began marketing vanilla ice cream made with this richer egg yolk base, they called it French vanilla to distinguish it from regular vanilla. Over time, the term French vanilla detached from its technical meaning and became a general marketing term for any vanilla flavor that was richer, deeper, more aromatic, or simply more expensive. Today, when you see French vanilla on a coffee creamer or a lip balm, it has nothing to do with French custard technique. It is a vibe. It is a suggestion. It is the same trick as French dressing. Slap the word French on it, and the flavor somehow tastes more sophisticated. Vanilla, by the way, is originally Mexican. The vanilla orchid was cultivated by the Totonac people of what is now Veracruz, centuries before any Europeans set foot in the Americas. The most French-sounding flavor in the American grocery store has nothing to do with France, and everything to do with a Mexican orchid and an American marketing department. That is food history in one bottle. Food number 7, French dip sandwich. We have arrived at one of my personal favorite entries on this list, because the French dip sandwich is so confidently named, so universally accepted as a continental delicacy, that the truth always feels like a small magic trick. The French dip is a sandwich consisting of thinly sliced roast beef on a French roll, served with a small bowl of warm beef broth called au jus, which the eater uses to dip the sandwich into between bites. It is a fixture of American diner menus, classic Los Angeles delicatessens, and steakhouse lunch specials across the country. It sounds French. It has French in the name. It comes with a French roll. The dipping liquid has a French name. So clearly, somewhere in the history of this sandwich, there must be a French chef in a French kitchen in France inventing this thing. There is not. The French dip was invented in Los Angeles, California, in the early 20th century. Two restaurants, Philippe the Original and Cole's Pacific Electric Buffet, both claim to have invented it, and both have been arguing about it for over 100 years, with the kind of civic intensity normally reserved for sports rivalries. Philippe's claim points to 1918, when a French immigrant owner named Philippe Mathieu allegedly dropped a French roll into the roasting pan drippings while making a sandwich for a customer, who was a police officer. The officer ate it, loved it, and came back the next day asking for the same sandwich. The juice-soaked version became the house specialty. Cole's claims a slightly different origin story from around the same period. Both restaurants are still operating today in downtown Los Angeles, both still serving their version of the original, and both still absolutely certain that the other one is lying. What is not disputed is that the sandwich is American. The only French thing about the French dip is the bread. And the bread is French only in the sense that it is a long, narrow, crusty white roll, vaguely modeled on a baguette. France has no equivalent sandwich. France would never put roast beef in a baguette and then hand you a cup of warm broth to dip it into. France would consider that combination structurally confused. The French dip is American, from concept to execution. It just happens to have a French name and a French-style roll, and that has been enough to convince the rest of the world that it must have come from somewhere across the Atlantic. It did not. It came from a roasting pan accident in Los Angeles, possibly involving a police officer, definitely involving two restaurants who will never agree on anything. I love this sandwich. I love its story even more. Food number 8, French bread. This one is going to feel almost too obvious until you really sit with it, and then it is going to bother you the way a small pebble in your shoe bothers you for the entire afternoon. French bread. The long, soft, white, slightly squishy loaf that appears in plastic bags in every American grocery store labeled French bread or Italian bread, interchangeably depending on the brand, is not French bread. It is not even particularly close to French bread. Actual French bread, the baguette tradition that France has spent centuries perfecting, is a specific thing. A real French baguette has a thin, shatteringly crisp crust, a chewy interior with large, irregular air pockets, a complex, slightly tangy flavor from long fermentation, and a shelf life of approximately 4 hours before it transforms into a weapon. France has actual laws governing what can be called a traditional baguette. The 1993 Decree on Bread in France specifies the ingredients, the production method, and even prohibits freezing during the baking process for any loaf labeled tradition. That is how seriously France takes its bread. The American product called French bread bears almost no resemblance to that. The American version is typically made with a soft, enriched dough, often containing sugar, oil, and sometimes milk, baked into a long loaf shape, packaged in plastic, and engineered for a shelf life of approximately a week. It is soft. It is slightly sweet. It is consistent. It is, by every measurable standard, a fundamentally different product from a French baguette. It exists because mid-20th century American consumers wanted bread that looked vaguely European but behaved like American sandwich bread. The food industry obliged. They made a soft, sweet, plastic-bagged loaf and called it French bread, and millions of Americans grew up believing that this was what bread in France actually tasted like. It is not. France would not recognize it. France would, in fact, be slightly horrified. The American grocery store French loaf is one of the great food-naming frauds of the 20th century, and it has been hiding in plain sight in every supermarket bread aisle for decades. Food number 9. French silk pie. Settle in for this one because French silk pie is one of the most genuinely American desserts ever invented, and yet it carries the word French at the front of its name with such breezy confidence that nobody ever questions it. French silk pie is a rich, dense chocolate cream pie filled with a smooth, almost mousse-like chocolate filling and topped with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. It is the kind of dessert that appears at holiday dinners, on the menus of family chain restaurants, and in the chilled pie cases of grocery store bakeries from coast to coast. It tastes like pure American excess in the most delightful way possible. The pie was invented in 1951 by a woman named Betty Cooper from Maryland, who entered her recipe in the Pillsbury Bake-Off contest, one of the great American culinary competitions of the 20th century. Her recipe won 3rd prize, which sounds modest until you realize that winning anything in the Pillsbury Bake-Off in the 1950s was enough to put your dessert on the map permanently. The original recipe used raw eggs, which is the kind of detail that modern food safety regulators have very strong feelings about. And modern versions typically use cooked custard bases or pasteurized eggs to make the dessert safe for mass production. Betty Cooper called it French silk pie because the texture was so silky, so smooth, so impossibly velvety, that the word French felt like the only appropriate label for something that luxurious. France has no equivalent dessert. France has tarts. France has mousses. France has all manner of incredible chocolate creations. But the specific format of a chocolate cream pie in a crust, topped with whipped cream, served cold from a refrigerator case, is an American invention. Born in a baking contest in 1951, named French because the inventor needed a word that sounded sophisticated, and now consumed by the tens of millions every single year. Betty Cooper from Maryland deserves a statue. I will start the campaign personally. Food number 10. French roast coffee. We end with the one that I find most quietly amusing, because French roast coffee is one of the most popular coffee styles in the United States, available at every grocery store, every coffee shop, every chain cafe in the country. It is dark. It is bold. It is intense. It has the word French right there in the name, which suggests that this style of roasting coffee beans must have been developed in France, perfected in Parisian cafes, and exported to the world. None of that is true. France is not a coffee-producing country. France has no significant historical tradition of roasting coffee in any particular signature style. France did not invent French roast. The term French roast refers to a very specific level of darkness in coffee bean roasting, somewhere just before what is called Italian roast, in which the beans are roasted until they are dark brown to almost black. The oils have come to the surface, and the flavor profile shifts from the bright acidity of lighter roasts to a deep, smoky, slightly bitter intensity. This roasting style was popularized commercially in the United States in the 20th century, particularly through the rise of coffee chains and specialty coffee retailers, who needed a vocabulary to describe different roast levels. The names assigned to those roast levels, light roast, medium roast, full city roast, Vienna roast, French roast, Italian roast, were essentially marketing terms. They referenced European coffee culture loosely, without corresponding to any actual European tradition of distinctly dark roasting. France did not roast coffee this way historically. Italy did, somewhat, particularly in the South, where espresso culture developed. But the American-style French roast, sold in bags at supermarkets across the country, is a specifically American product, wearing a specifically French-sounding label. The roasting method is American. The naming convention is American. The commercial scale of the entire French roast category in the modern coffee industry is American. France drinks coffee. France enjoys coffee. France has lovely cafes. France does not roast French roast. We do, and we have been quietly using the word French to make our dark coffee sound continental for nearly a century. 10 foods, 10 names, 10 quiet little fictions hiding in plain sight on grocery store shelves and restaurant menus all over the world. From a tavern keeper in colonial Albany who could not punctuate his own menu, to American soldiers in Belgium who thought they were in France, to a baking contest winner from Maryland who needed a word that sounded fancy, to a Los Angeles roast beef sandwich that started as an accident in a roasting pan and ended up as a continental classic. France is one of the greatest culinary civilizations in human history. Nobody is taking that away. French cuisine is real. It is extraordinary. It is foundational to the entire modern restaurant industry, and the world is better for it. But somewhere along the way, America fell in love with the word French itself. Not the food, not the technique, not the tradition, just the word. The 5-letter shortcut to sophistication. The marketing trick that made a soft white sandwich loaf sound like a Parisian bakery. The label that turned a custard ice cream into something exotic. The name that made a tavern keeper's misspelling stick for 300 years. That is not theft. That is not appropriation. That is something stranger and more interesting. It is the American genius for taking a word, dressing it up in a slightly different costume, and convincing the entire world that the costume was real all along. Every dish on this list is genuinely delicious. Every dish on this list deserves its place on the menu. They just deserve their actual names, and their actual histories, and the people who actually invented them. Now you know. If this changed the way you read a menu, hit that like button and subscribe to Food Origins, because we have stories exactly like this one lined up for cuisines, cities, and countries that are going to completely rearrange the way you see your plate. Tell me in the comments which one of these surprised you the most. I have a feeling the French silk pie is going to start some arguments. And honestly, good. The best food conversations always do.